There it is. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
And it's good to have everybody here. And we have 40 devices on, and that is because Rabbi Lotger is leading the service. I don't get 40 people when I'm leading the service. Anyway, I won't take it personally. So because of what happened last weekend, you all know about Colleyville and the hostage situation, I wanted to just open the service with reading a couple of prayers, which I thought were relevant. And they're both by a rabbi whose name was written on my paper, but I don't have it right now, so I'll give it to you later. Okay, the first one is called Grace World. On some Sunday mornings, my dad would get up early, put on his uniform, and drive to a local church to direct traffic. And on some Saturday mornings, my dad would get up early, put on his uniform, and drive to our synagogue, not to pray, but to stand guard. Sometimes I'd leave services in the middle to watch him. I saw how his shoulders would tighten when a stranger passed, when a new car pulled into the parking lot, and then release when they turned around or drove away. The church was called Grace World. They were so lucky to live in that world. The good grace of only having to worry about fender benders, of a clogged path of cars on the way out. None of that grace for our synagogue. Instead, a world of carefully locked entrances, a sacred fortress. It could happen here. Thought but never said. It never did. Not to me, not there. Is that all the grace I can hope for? So that's the sad poem, or the sad prayer, which reflects what happened and what has happened, unfortunately, in recent years. But there's also a lot of strength. I've sent out a couple of things to people, one of which is that wonderful prayer written by Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker. So I'm not going to read that since I sent it to everybody, but this is another piece. We are the people of, is what it's called. We are the people of the book. Don't read it all in one sitting. Some of its chapters will break your heart. We will use it to teach you how to live, to break your heart on purpose. We are the people of the tree. Don't cut us down. Don't you know what wisdom we contain? We will teach you how to reach towards the light. We are the people of the garden. Doesn't matter how far you take us from our home, you will find us flourishing. We will teach you how to grow in all conditions. We are the people of the air. Don't tear us apart. You will breathe our shared breath. We will teach you how to fill it up with song. We are the people of the heart. Doesn't matter how hard yours is, our muscle softens as it opens. We will teach you how to make joy where there is only pain. We are the people of each other. We are the people of the choosing to be who we are over and over again, even when it hurts us, even when it breaks us. We will be who we are over and over again. So we have all been through difficult times, and we've survived and we've flourished. And that's what's so important. So I am very pleased to be able to introduce my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Michael Lotger. Now, Rabbi Lotger has been here several times before, so he doesn't need a lot of introduction, but I'm still going to give you a little bit of his background. He's a second career rabbi, and he was ordained at the age of 55 from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in 2003. We were ordained together. He's a physicist who spent his first career in alternative energy, focusing on wind, solar, and geothermal energy. And he holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in physics from Queens College in New York City and from the University of Illinois. Before his ordination, he received the Master's of Hebrew Letters from Hebrew Union College. And as an entrepreneur, he started a number of alternative energy firms, including a wind power development company that installed and operated wind farms in Hawaii and California. He's widely published in the alternative energy field. He's also been published as a rabbi. He wrote a book called What Every Serious Christian Should Know About Judaism. And he's also taught a whole bunch of classes that are on his website. Lotger.com, I believe, is the website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. He's right now, he's Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Ner Ami in Camarillo, California, and scholar in residence at Temple Adat Elohim in Thousand Oaks. He's also the community rabbi for the Jewish Federation of Ventura County. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Rabbi Michael Lotger.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And I just want you to know, Suzanne and I are more than just buddies and sharing some rooms during rabbinical school. We were often study buddies and worked together on projects at HUC. And Rabbi Singer officiated at my marriage to my wife, Sonia. So it is a delight to see her again, albeit virtually, and a delight to see all of you again. And I'm going to go to share screen for the service. And I hope and trust you can see it. Yes, somebody give me a thumbs up if it's good. Okay, good. So Shabbat Shalom, you know, Shalom we think of as sort of a Hebrew version of aloha, but it's deeper than that. Shalom means not only hello, goodbye, and peace. It comes from the concept of shlemut, which means wholeness or completeness. And this is a holiday. Of course, it's the most common holiday in our tradition, but this particular Shabbat is one in which it's not so easy to find shlemut and wholeness. So we will struggle to find it together. I'm going to begin with or ask a rabbi. I think you have someone ready to light Shabbat candles. So we're going to begin with the lighting of Sabbath candles.
It's Susie Kopel, and she is going to do that for us.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which we live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahalik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat.
Thank you, Susie.
Amen.
And moving to the Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinhilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom tehillah l'mikrai kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, Kivanu b'charta, v'otanu kidashta, mikol hamim, v'shabbat kodshecha, b'ahava uvratzon, hinhaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh hashabbat. L'chaim.
L'chaim. I just want to mention that the poems that I read earlier are by Rabbi Stephanie Crawley.
Thank you. And l'chadodi. a melody that I know. I don't know so many melodies. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Hishmianu el hamayuchad, Adonai echad, U'shemo echad, L'shemu tiferet le'ila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki makor habracha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshavati la. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, hitoreri, kiva orechumi uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. So the tradition is to rise and face a door to your room or west the setting sun. I'm not going to rise so you don't, so I can still remain in the frame of the picture. Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala, gam b'simcha uvetzola, tov emunei am segula, boi kala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Beginning the service with the Baruch Hu, our call to worship, I want to recognize, I think Rabbi Singer recognized that Rabbi Cohen is here, and I also noticed now, where did she go on my screen?
Rabbi Annette Koch is also here.
Rabbi Annette is here, both dear friends of ours. So again, I'm going to remain seated as I face east and have our lead you in the call to worship. Morechu et Adonai hamevora, Baruch Adonai hamevora leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai hamborach leolam va'ed. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath fills the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, we guide the current of our day into night. As the heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. And the Shema. So I'm going to do one little bit of teaching. I can't resist. Something I learned from my teacher, our teacher, Rabbi Larry Kushner, about how you can put Shaddai on your face when you recite the Shema. So Shaddai is Shin Daled Yud. So the three fingers of my hand here represent the Shin. I put them on my forehead. Crooking my thumb, it looks like a Daled. That goes on one eye. And the littlest finger stands for the littlest letter Yud. Shaddai on our faces. Please join me. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem kivod malachuto leolam va'ed. And Rabbi, I believe you have someone who's going to be leading us in the Ve'ahavta.
Yes, Carol Lee is going to lead us in the Ve'ahavta.
Be happy to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Oh,
Thank
good. Okay. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al bavecha V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shiftecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha uv'kshartam le'od al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha laman tiskaru vasitem et kol mitzvotai vitem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti echem me'eretz Mitzrayim Liot lahem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem.
Thank you, Carol Lee.
Pleasure.
And our song of redemption, which is pretty important at this moment when we need so much redemption. As we'll see in the 10 Commandments, one of the which is our Torah portion this week, one of the commandments is about the Sabbath. And the one we love to remember is the commandment to rest on the Sabbath. But in that commandment, there's also the commandment to work on the other 6 days, to work on our task. Our task is redemption. And we draw energy by remembering back the beautiful moment of redemption that took place at the shore of the Sea of Reeds, when the sea parted and we were redeemed from slavery from Egypt. The tradition is that everyone burst into song led by the prophetess Miriam. There's even a tradition that all who saw this great miracle burst into song. Of course, they burst into song in Hebrew. And so we follow their Hebrew singing by singing Mi Chamocha, which is taken in large part from the Song of the Sea. Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi Chamocha nehedar ba'kodesh, Nora tehilot osefele, Nora tehilot osefele, Malchutecha ra'uvanecha, Bokei hayam, Lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Ze lianu ve'ameru, Adonai yimloch, Adonai yimloch, Le'olam va'ed, V'ne'emar kifad Adonai et Yaakov, Uge'alo miyad chazak mimenu, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. And the central prayer of our tradition, the Amidah, the standing prayer, again, those that want to remain seated, feel free to remain seated. This is the prayer that actually took the place of animal sacrifice. In place of sacrificing animals at the temple, once the temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of a common era, the rabbis reformed Judaism into a religion based not on animal sacrifice and a priesthood, but on prayer, doing mitzvot, studying sacred text, and having services. And the service, instead of serving God breakfast, lunch, and dinner, was to serve God this prayer 3 times a day. Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Hasdei Avot v'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer Umoshia Umagen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah, Atagi Bor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye HaKol atah, Rav Lehoshia, Ma'ashiv HaRuach, Umorid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Baal Givurot, Umido Mehalach, Melech Memit, Umechaye, Umatmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman Ata L'chachayot HaKol, Baruch Ata Adonai, Mechaye HaKol. Ata Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh, U'Kodashim B'chol Yom Yechalucha Salah. Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. So rather than singing Shalom Rav and inflicting my voice upon you, I think I'll just read this prayer, a prayer for peace, a prayer for wholeness. That's also a prayer that we pray 3 times a day. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon lechol hashalom. V'tov be'enecha levarech et Amcha et Amcha Yisrael uvechol. Now I can't actually read it. I have to sing it. V'tov be'enecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael bechol eit ubechol sha'a bishlomecha baruch atah Adonai hamvarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. So we'll pause for just a few moments of silent prayer as we hold this troubled world in our hearts, plagued by anger, by violence, by animosity, by disease. There's a lot to pray for. Oh, say shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, imru, amen. Misha Berach for healing. Rabbi, I believe you're going to read a
Yes,
list.
I will.
And we'll sing Debbie Friedman's beautiful version of the Misha Berach.
So as we pray for peace and we pray for wholeness, we also pray for healing for members of our congregation and friends and family of members. Jonathan Davidson, Ben Henderson, Kara Gilman, Rabbi Steve Robbins, Gloria Mangus, Steve Lux, Leslie Ferris, Pamela Mangus, Johnny Sikat, Sid Love, Larry Miller, Jeff Simons, Barbara Droutman, Reverend Dr. Tom Bokach, Mark McGuire, Martha Miller, Judy Richmond, Larry Wittek, Fernando Guerrero, Mark Edwards, Zach Frankenberg, Miriam Thrawn, Joseph Ritter, Mariola Choshek, Lita Mintz. Please add names in the chat and I will read them out as well. Judy Cohen, Ezel Walton, Ruth and Sandra and Jess Landis, Ron Jones, Ron Brazil, Richard and Mary Scott, Amy Morton, Chris Hanlon, Kim Ko, Raul Camacho, Shelley Brandler, Emmy Levine, Alan Hurwitz, Diana Anderson, Sheila Winston, Jackson Griffin, Joan Bertoli, Lauren Woodruff, Alicia Harada, Kirsten Walsh, Sarah Gailey, the Taufa family, the Yulu Ave family, Howard and Martha Lester, Jaime and Ludi, Lucy Hogel, Linda Williams, Diane Fritsch, Matthew Soloway, and please join us in the Mishabera, although muted, please.
I only have the names of Howard Lotker, Stephanie Lotker, and Andrea Lotker. Mishabera avotenu makor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu makor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. So the rabbi and I have had lots of discussions about what to talk about, and I originally planned to speak about ethics. And then as the events of the last Sabbath broke out, I thought I would talk about anti-Semitism, particularly in the context of the 10 Commandments, or the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each. I am going to talk a little bit about anti-Semitism and also direct you on my website to other sources for that. But I do want to speak about ethics, and particularly business ethics tonight as well. And in some sense, all of this stems from Torah. So here's a listing of Torah. Actually, I finally read it carefully. It's kind of nice. It says, instead of I am Adonai, your God, it's I am Anochi Hashem Elokeinu. So I actually can't even remember where I got this slide from. But actually, not only does ethics come from this, but in a sense, as we'll see, anti-Semitism comes from this. Because here is God introducing God's self to the Jewish people. And one of the interesting things here is, you would think, particularly in light of what we talked about last night, that science and religion and the creation of the universe, if God were introducing God's self to us, I would think God would say, I'm the God, and oh, by the way, I created the universe. Pretty good trick, right? But that's not what the introduction is. It's, I am the God who led you out of Egypt, the house of bondage, not all the language of the Aseret HaDibrot is there. God is a God who acts in history. And then it says, you shall have no other gods before me. Don't make a graven image and don't worship them. And in a sense, as we'll see, that becomes the heart of anti-Semitism. At the heart of anti-Semitism is, not only are we now exposed to an amazing concept, monotheism, which says not only is our God the best God and our God's better than your God, but as the prophets will later say, oh, by the way, your gods are false gods. And we have to proclaim it. We Jews do not have the right to remain silent. So we are going to be proclaiming to the world the nature of God. And it's not always going to go along with what the rest of the world understands as God. So a few words on anti-Semitism. When I teach a class, and you'll see some classes I've taught on the subject, people will raise all kinds of possible reasons. And I know that this is not the largest type in the world, but scapegoats, ethnic hatred, xenophobia, fear of the other, resentment of affluence, professional success, religious bigotry. I'm very influenced by a book called Why the Jews by Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin, who argue, and compellingly for me, that the reason for anti-Semitism is Judaism. It's the teachings of Judaism, that we have an allegiance to God, Torah, and Israel. That our reason for existence is to change the world for the better, that God chooses us for this task. We understand that God has chosen other peoples for other tasks. God tells us this is not going to be easy. God tells us that the world is not going to like us for this task. And as a result of Jewish law and Jewish living and kashrut and education, we Jews tend to have a better quality of life. One of the fascinating things about anti-Semitism is, except for the Nazis, Jews could escape, at least in theory, anti-Semitism by converting to the larger community, to other religions, to abandoning the idea of Jewish peoplehood, and just saying, well, we're just citizens, and Judaism is not really a people, but a religion. Jew hatred is unique in the world. It's the world's oldest hatred, and it's powerful that every community that's had a significant Jewish population within it, with the single exception of the United States, has at one time or another expelled that community. The horror is nothing new. If you look at, I'm going to show you where to find some of the classes that I've taught on this subject. But in the 1600s, the Chmielnicki massacres seemed like the Holocaust, and writings of early church fathers and of Martin Luther and of Voltaire sound like they were taken out of a Nazi textbook. And I mentioned that any nation that has had a Jewish population has viewed us as a threat. Whoops, let me back up one. So as Rabbi mentioned, I have a website, simply lotger.com. I have lots of classes on the website. For the last 2 years, I have been teaching, I would say, several times a week. Many of you have joined me in these classes, and it's pretty easy to record them, and record I have. So in connection with a program called Shine a Light on Anti-Semitism, we actually had 6 sessions covering different subjects. And if you go to lotger.com and go to classes, you can find both materials and the recording of those classes. But I do want to talk about Jewish ethics and focus tonight on personal and business ethics. As you'll see, I actually have 2 classes on that as well. Okay, there they are. I taught 2 classes, one on medical ethics and one on business and personal ethics. And you can watch both of those classes and download copies of the full PowerPoint on my website. If you click on the classes and then you have to scroll down, my website isn't the best organized website in the world. So moving to the subject of personal and business ethics, there's a wonderful book by Dr. Ron Wolfson called The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. And again, if I were doing this more interactively and spending more time, I would ask you what you think the questions are. And I'm not going to cover all of them, but I am going to cover the first question. The first question is, according to Rava in the Talmud, when a person is led for judgment in the next world, God asks, did you transact your business honestly? Did you fix time for the study of Torah? Did you fulfill your duty to establish a family? So the first question, sorry, Bernie Madoff, is about honesty. And, you know, the writings I've seen on this suggest it might be pretty easy, you know, for us to tie our tzitzit correctly. It might be easy to keep kosher. It might be easy to pray 3 times a day. But how do you treat your employees? How do you treat your family members? How do you respect not only people, but animals and the environment? That's not so easy. There's a wonderful series of books by Elliot Dorff and various of his colleagues. I'm just looking at the names down there, on Jewish choices, Jewish voices, and a lot from the class on business ethics I take from this first volume on money. So now I'm just going to share with you what I think are some very powerful texts on ethics, because we're not always aware how much in our tradition there is about ethics. So first, from the Torah, it says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Adonai, I am the Lord, translated here. In Leviticus, It says, when you sell property to your neighbor or buy property, you shall not wrong one another. Namely, don't cheat other people in business transactions. This one's interesting. It says, you shall not have in your pouch alternative weights, larger and smaller, for measuring goods that you're selling. You must have honest weights if you are to endure long on the soil that God is giving you. One of the interesting things here is you're not even allowed to own false weights. It's not only you're not allowed to cheat, we've covered that in other places, but removing maybe even the temptation, you're not allowed to own false weights and measures. Just some more text. I love these texts. And again, the PowerPoint that I referenced will have copies of all of these. A very famous text from Sanhedrin, from the Mishnah, which explains why we come from one couple according to our Torah. For this reason, Adam was created alone, to teach you that destroying a single life is to destroy a whole world, even as to save a whole life is to save a whole world. And for the sake of the peace of creation, that no one should say to another, my ancestor was greater than yours. By the way, this phrase that to save a life is to save an entire world, you may remember from the end of Schindler's List, where it's clear that what Schindler managed to save was not only the people on his list, but all the generations following those people. And that dictum, that law, is not only in our Talmud and the Mishnah, it's also in the Quran. It's one of the many things. I'm going to be talking tomorrow about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but the Quran picks that up as well. Also from the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi taught, let the property of others be as precious as your own. Let all your deeds be for the sake of heaven. And again, from Pirkei Avot, when one pleases one's fellow creatures, God is pleased. When one does not please one fellow's creature, God is not pleased. Speaking maybe more to our current political situation, one who accepts upon oneself the position of political authority for benefit is considered an adulterer. Rabbi Yochanan said, woe to those who have great authority, for it buries those who possess it. And from the Talmud, Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, what is the meaning of the verse, you shall walk behind the Lord your God? It means that a person should imitate the righteous ways of the Holy One, blessed be God. Just as the Lord clothed the naked, so too you must supply clothes to the naked. Just as the Holy Blessed One visited the sick, so you should visit the sick. Just as the Holy One buried the dead, so you too must bury the dead. Just as the Holy One comforted mourners, so you too shall comfort mourners. This is a little involved, but it's a fantastic story. A court case in a Jewish court. There's more than a Beit Din here. We have 4 rabbis. You only need 3 rabbis for a Jewish court, a Beit Din. I'm going to read it because, again, I know the text is not so large. And there's a powerful lesson about Jewish law in this. There was a Rabbi Bar Chana, who once hired workmen to transport barrels of wine for him. They were negligent, and as a result, the barrels of wine broke. And this man incurred a severe financial loss. He took the workers to court, suing them for the value of the wine that was destroyed. And the workers' only defense was, we can't afford it. We don't have the money. What are you going to do about it? So the courts found in favor of the worker. So Rabbi Bar Chana questioned the court and said, is this the law? Is it not the law that I'm entitled to recover for their negligence? And the court told him, for you, this is the law. You are a righteous person. And because you are a righteous person, you have to take into account the equities of the situation, the unfairness, the fact that these are people who need money and so on. And therefore you are compelled by virtue of your righteous status to go beyond pressing your exact legal rights. Well, then, perhaps this is an ancient example of chutzpah. In an ancient example of chutzpah, they turned around and the workers sued their boss for their lost wages. They said, well, wait a minute, you didn't pay us wages for that day. So he was dumbfounded. He said, okay, it's one thing to say I can't recover from you, but are you going to recover from me when you broke my wine because of your negligence? astoundingly, the court said, yes, that's a good idea. You have to pay. And once again, he asked, is this the law? And they told him, for you, that's the law. These are people who need the money, and therefore you must go beyond the law. One of the very powerful things I learned in my Jewish law course at HUC was that a rabbi is a judge, and we are ordained on our ordination certificate. It talks about us being judges, that the judge in a Jewish court does more than simply interpret the law and apply it to the case. In a Western court, the job of a judge is to understand the law and look at the facts. Maybe a jury decides what actually happened, but the court applies in a disinterested way the law to the case. In a Jewish court, the law, the judges, I should say, have an additional responsibility to represent God in the case. A concept I find fascinating. So here's another, just a good story. Actually, I don't know what it's, well, it's from Dorf and Newman. A business executive, in the Talmud, it asks the question, Mi Ashir, who is rich? And the lesson is, I'm pretty sure this is Pirkei Avot, is the one who is satisfied with what he or she has. So a story. A business executive wanting a different sort of vacation hired a fishing boat to take him out to sea. They sailed, they fished, and the executive was more relaxed than he had been in years. One evening, the business person said to the fisherman, why don't you franchise? Why would I want to do that? Replied the fisherman. You could have dozens of boats giving fantastic fishing tours in many cities, answered the executive. So what? Responded the fisherman. You could make millions of dollars. Think of what you could do with all that money, exclaimed the executive. And he responded, I would sail out on the sea, put my feet up, open a bottle of wine, and watch the sunset, said the fisherman. With that, the fisherman put up his feet, poured a glass of wine, and watched the sunset. The executive understood. A lot of Jewish ethics has to do with prohibited speech. Words That Hurt, Words That Heal is a wonderful book by Joseph Telushkin. And in the full class that I teach on this, I quote a lot from that book. And I'm not going to go into any detail because I want to be respectful of your time, but just some quotes on Lashon Hara, literally evil tongue. Who is the person who is eager for life, who desires years of good fortune? Guard your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from deceitful speech. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. There are three kinds of speech involved in Lashon Hara that we should seek to decrease or eliminate. Information and comments that are non-defamatory and true. This is watch what you say, because even sometimes when you are speaking well of someone, it can invoke trouble. And I can think of, of a couple of examples of this. One, and one that's immediate to this last week. One actually has to do from the Bible. God is bragging about Job. Rabbi is going to be talking about Job in the next weeks. God is bragging to the heavenly host, including Satan, about what a great guy Job is. And that ultimately causes Job lots of problems. And that's actually one of the derivations for this idea. You all remember President Ford. President Ford was the poor guy, nice guy. He was the subject of 2 assassination attempts. And in one case, the man that literally grabbed the gun of the assailant was a guy named Oliver Sipple. And he saved President Ford's life. As you can imagine, the press was very interested in finding out about him. And he responded by saying, I did what anybody would do. I think he was an ex-serviceman, maybe a Marine. It was instinct. And please don't ask me lots of questions. Don't dig into my life. Well, you can imagine how the press accepted that. They dug and dug and dug and dug. And as it turned out, they found out that he was a supporter. This was in San Francisco. He was active in gay rights organizations. He turned out to be gay himself. His family didn't know this. They ostracized him. They cut off all communications from him. And he wound up dying alone in his apartment. So they were there to praise him, but it didn't turn out so well. And even in the case of the rabbi who behaved so magnificently last week, the press has been digging into his relationship with his congregation and publishing things that aren't always the kinds of things that we would like to hear. So even when things are true, we should think about what we say. Certainly negative stories, though true, we also are not supposed to report unless it's clear that you have to prevent harm to someone else. So if you know a doctor, let's say, is practicing malpractice, has an addiction, is a danger to his patients, you would say, if I were you, I wouldn't see that doctor. But you don't necessarily explain why unless it's absolutely necessary. And then, of course, lies and rumor, that things that are negative and false. And one very famous story. Well, first, let me talk about this one. The tongue is compared to an arrow in an old Jewish teaching. Why not another weapon, a sword, for example? Because if a person unsheathes his sword to kill a friend, and his friend pleads with him and begs for mercy, the man may be mollified and return the sword to its scabbard. But an arrow once shot cannot be returned, no matter how much one wants to. And once you say something, it's not so easy to recall it. Here's a very famous story. I suspect you may have heard it, but if you haven't, you should. In a small Eastern European town, a man went through the community slandering the rabbi. Of course, this would never happen in modern times, right? Rabbis are unheard of. One day, feeling suddenly remorseful, he begged the rabbi for forgiveness and offered to undergo any penance to make amends. The rabbi told him to take a feather pillow from his home, cut it open, and scatter the feathers to the wind, and then return to see him. The man did as he was told, and then came to the rabbi and asked, "Am I now forgiven?" Almost, came the response. "You just have to do one more thing. Go and gather all the feathers." "But that's impossible," the man protested. "The wind has already scattered them." "Precisely," the rabbi answered. "Although you truly wish to correct the evil you have done, it is impossible to repair the damage done by your words as it is to recover the feathers." And in Jewish tradition, when you've wronged someone, not only do you have to ask forgiveness and receive forgiveness from the person you've wronged, you have to the maximum degree possible, try and undo the consequence of the wrong thing that you've done. And with gossip and slander, it is virtually impossible, because it's not only the people you've told, but the people that they tell. So some bottom lines on this subject. In the words of the Hasidic Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, if you're not going to be any better tomorrow than you were today, then what need you have you of tomorrow? Rabbi Milton Steinberg, when I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I'm older, I admire kind people. Rabbi Jack Reamer's 4 phrases to live by: thank you, I love you, how are you, and what do you need? And Rabbi Harold Kushner, only God can give us credit for the angry or other cruel words that we did not speak. I would love to go through a similar discussion of medical ethics. And in the class that I have online, I talk about text and tradition, children's sex, artificial insemination, preventing pregnancy and abortion, homosexuality, death and dying, preventing and treating illness, and availability of costs of healthcare and other topics. But we simply don't have time to go through this. So, I encourage you, invite me back and I'll give classes on ethics or just consult online. And a rabbi suggested that we at least have a few minutes. Again, I don't know how much time of yours I am taking, but if there's a question or a comment, I would be happy to entertain it.
Well, maybe you can stop sharing so we can see people.
Yes,
and I can see
yes.
who's-
I always
yeah.
forget to do that.
And of course, you give us nice little hints about possible other sessions that you can offer. So would anybody like to ask any questions or make a comment?
I have a quick question, Rabbi.
Yes, please.
Okay, please.
The story about the wine barrels that were broken through negligence.
Mhm.
Doesn't the Torah teach that you shouldn't favor either the rich or the poor when you're handing out judgment?
The Torah absolutely teaches that. I think there's an element in here that suggests because the offended person was a tzaddik and a rabbi, that he, in this case, should go beyond the minimum requirements of the law. But it is also an example, and there's another example which I can mention of a rabbi as a judge representing God. So there's a horrible thing in Jewish law, thankfully not in either Reform or conservative tradition, of the mamzer. A mamzer, which is often translated as a bastard, but it doesn't mean a child born out of wedlock. It means a child born of a forbidden union, such as adultery. We'll just use that one. There are other cases as well. And the problem with a mamzer is not allowed to marry an ordinary Jew. A mamzer can only marry another mamzer. And now with record keeping and computers, it's even worse in the traditional world. So I remember in rabbinical school hearing this example. A guy comes to a rabbi, a couple comes and says, we want to get married, but one of us is a mamzer. So let's say it's the guy who's a mamzer. And the rabbi says, wait a minute, I have a question for you. Are you sure you're Jewish? He says, of course I'm Jewish. What about your mother? Is she Jewish? Of course my mother's Jewish. What about your grandmother? He said, are you kidding, my bubby? Of course my bubby is Jewish. How about your great grandmother? Well, you know, I never met her, but I presume she's Jewish. What about her great grandmother? You know, going back 7 generations. Well, I presume she's Jewish, but how would I know? And the rabbi says, aha, there is doubt about whether you are actually Jewish. Therefore, you need a conversion. So therefore, he takes the guy to draw a drop of blood from a circumcision site, takes him to the mikvah, and now he's Jewish. And because there was doubt about whether he was Jewish before, now he is newly Jewish and therefore cannot be a mamzer because before he wasn't Jewish. So that's a way a rabbi as judge can, I would say, pervert the law in God's name. And there's other examples of that as well.
That's great.
Other thoughts.
It's called loopholes.
Yes.
Any other questions? Christine.
I'm interested to know how one balances the sort of efforts that many people are making today of like speaking truth to power and basically trying to rework the injustices that have been perpetrated and keep being perpetrated. I mean, I understand that you don't just get up there and yell at people and stuff like that, but basically pointing out the impact of what has been done in the name of you name it. Okay.
Right.
And how does that get balanced out with this sort of be careful of what you're saying? I mean,
right.
yes,
It's
people are
a
careful
great
of what they
question.
say, but yeah.
It's a great question, and it is a question of balance. Certainly in the prophetic tradition, which is particularly important in Reform Judaism, the history of the prophets are speaking truth to power, and not necessarily in a subtle way. As you were asking the question, I was reminded of a tradition which I had, I think, in one of the other slides, which I didn't show, is you are supposed to speak in a way that will be heard. So to speak out on something in a way that you know won't be heard is not okay. And I'll give you an actual example, from my rabbinic life. I once had a congregant who came to me and said, I was playing golf and we were in a foursome and somebody made a crack about Jewing someone down, negotiating. And I responded to this guy by saying, very much in his face and in the context of the foursome playing golf, I'm a Jew and I find that remark offensive and I would like you to apologize. Now, do you think that guy apologized? No. So the way in which you speak out, and there's an actual, a commandment in Leviticus, hocheach tocheach, you shall surely reprove. But the text goes on, or the tradition goes on to say, you have to do it in a way which will be heard. So what I said was, next time you're presented with this kind of a situation, if you pulled the person aside and said, I'm sure you didn't realize that what you said was offensive, and you may not have known that I'm Jewish, but I just want you to know that this kind of language is very painful for us Jews to hear. And, I just hope you'll bear that in mind. That kind of thing can be heard. Now, if you're speaking to the king, probably you don't have an opportunity to pull the king aside. So there's protection of life. There's, of course, the prophets were individually ordered by God to do this, and I would think that would supersede other requirements. But it is a great question, and it is always a question of balance. When do you say something, and how do you say something? Again, relating to this week, I'm very active in an interfaith group, and we actually had a meeting last night. And as many of my colleagues who are with us, Annette, Hillel, and Suzanne, will say one of the things that we've seen on Facebook and other areas is the silence from the interfaith community in response to what happened a week ago. And it may well have been because nobody was killed. So I guess maybe the reaction was nobody was killed, no big deal. But and I asked, my rabbi, who is my wife, Sonia, how I should respond to this in our community. And she recommended, and what I did was, when I went online, we had a Zoom meeting, just last night. And I said, I just want you to know how much this incident affected me and how afraid I am. And how, there was nothing that we do in our synagogues that would have prevented this. People knock on the door. Typically, we let them in, even if they don't know the secret password. And so that's what I shared. I didn't share that I was so much offended and so on, but I shared the fact that it was painful to me. And it was very much a conscious effort to speak in a way that will be heard rather than in their face, why didn't you call? So.
And I would just add to that we're not supposed to humiliate people either.
Right.
That's why you take people aside. So you know what? Rabbi Lotker will hang out right after the service, so we can continue a discussion if anybody would like to hang on afterwards. I want to thank Rabbi Lotker for an always stimulating conversation. He kept the service fairly short so that we could have more time on this subject. I also want to thank the Legacy Fund, who made it possible for him to be here as a scholar in residence for the weekend. He will also be leading Torah study tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. But he's going to focus not so much, on the Torah portion, but more on or maybe you'll use the Torah portion for
I
this.
always can figure out a way to do that.
There's always a way to do that, yeah. So, but it's going to be comparing the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So that should be very interesting. I would like to also share a message from Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the head of our Union for Reform Judaism, and who is, responding to the weekend's events. So I'm going to do that right now.
Last Shabbat, we held our breath for 11 long hours as Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker was held hostage along with 3 members of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. They've gathered for prayer as we do this and every Shabbat to gain strength from our tradition, from one another, and from the Holy One. The Torah portion they gathered to read last week was the drama at the Red Sea when our ancestors were finally able to escape plague-ridden Egypt and miraculously made their way across the sea to the shore of freedom. Last Shabbat was supposed to be about liberation, but instead these 4 courageous souls endured a day of captivity, trauma, and fear. Later in last week's Torah portion, the Israelites are attacked by the Amalekites, who have a deep-seated hatred of our people. Moses leads the fight against the Amalekites, and as long as his hands are held high, the Israelites prevail. But when his arms tire, they begin to succumb. Aaron and Hur come to prop up Moses' arms, leading our ancestors to victory over their hate-filled adversaries. Last week, Rabbi Citron Walker was the one whose hands were held high, which helped.
I don't know if this is true of others, but my screen just froze.
It froze. I don't know
lead
why.
our siblings in Colleyville to prevail. All of us were cast as Aaron and Hur, as prayers were offered from every quarter of the Jewish community, and so many of other faiths also stood with us in solidarity. Our arms helped support theirs. Our arms helped sustain those who showed up to win their safe release. As much as trauma and fear filled last Shabbat, liberation came in the dark of night. And on this Shabbat, we are showing up. That's what we do. We're not going to be kept from living Jewish lives of depth and commitment. We're not going to cower hoping for better days. Our friends at Congregation Beth Israel taught us that training and preparation can save lives. We're going to continue being smart and careful about the security of our communities. We are in a deep partnership with the ADL, bringing resources and training to our congregations, as well as educational materials for our communities to understand the many layers of anti-Semitism and how we can fight it together. It's important to conclude with a teaching from this week's portion entitled Yitro, named after a non-Jewish spiritual leader who is also Moses' father-in-law. Moses receives love and wisdom from Yitro as he struggles to administer justice. As we gather tonight, we are heartened and moved by the many contemporary Yitros, leaders of other faith communities who are standing with us. We're grateful for your friendship and solidarity. As you have shown up for us last Shabbat and this one, we pledge that we will continue to show up for each other. That is one of the most critical ways we can keep our multi-faith, multiracial communities secure and safe. On this Shabbat, we ask the Holy One to spread a protective shelter over all our congregations who are gathered in love.
Hey.
And solidarity. Ufros Alenu Sukat Shlomecha, Holy One, spread over all of us a sukkah of peace as we continue to draw strength from one another. May we never stop showing up when it matters most. Shabbat Shalom.
So we're going to keep showing up. We're going to keep making sure that we don't give in to hatred or fear either. We are going to continue now with the Alenu, which Rabbi Lochter will lead us in.
Whoops. Okay. I don't know. Can you see us or are you seeing each other?
Alenu, there's Alenu.
Okay, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you. Again, tradition is to face east. Rise if you're comfortable rising. Alenu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol la'teit gedula liotzer breshit shelo asanu k'goyei ha'aratzot v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu k'chol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shamo echad. And again, I will pause the screen sharing. And I think, Rabbi, you're going to read the Kaddish list. You're muted.
We now take a moment to think of those in need to think of those who are no longer with us. May their memories be for a blessing. And we're observing Shloshim for Marilyn Whitmer, grandmother of Adam Whitmer, and for Gary Ginsberg, nephew of Ruth Geller. And I would ask that you share names in the chat, or if you want to unmute, for anybody that you're thinking of tonight who passed away in the last week, month, or year. Edith Tanizaki, first year Elena Archibek Ferris. Those who've lost their lives in the volcanic disaster. Stan Walkman and Joanne Heslin, first year. Larry Emmershai, 30 days. Pauline Geerling's first year. Alan Pasternak and Myrna Pavelak, first year. Elaine Burke, first year. Reverend Evans and Willie Davis, first year. Anybody else? And we're also observing Doug Hardy. We're also observing yard sites this Shabbat for Selma Lesser, Virginia Matthias, Joe Jerome, Sarah Taylor, Norman Burke, Phyllis Lewin, Bernice Usack, Seymour Birkenwald, Jacob Kirshner, Steve Black, Samuel Landis, Janet Baker, Jeanette Urban, John Cronenfeld, Jacob Schneider, Samuel Elkin, Herman Band, Edith Klieger, Henriette Halleck, Lillian Metch, Lloyd Alberga, Yvonne Jarrell, Benjamin Exler, Esther Gropin, Murray Willen, Abraham Levy, Shirley Boasberg, Rosa Wilczkowski, Willie Wilczkowski. And then there's some more in the chat. Charles Gailey III, Lula Mae Clemens, Bob Wickham. Would anybody like to mention, anyone else like to mention a name for the art site? Okay, please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish, which I guess you'll share the screen for us. Thank you.
Are we?
That's, yeah, that's. And you can unmute if you'd like to join us in the Mourner's Kaddish. Yikadal v'yikadash shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divrach yechutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei lechol Beit Yisrael. V'adalah v'zman kariv imru. Amen.
Amen.
Hey
Yehesh
shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam kol mei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'mam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudashah b'richu.
Rechu.
Le'ela min kol vilchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechemata. Na'amiran be'alma. Imru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya. V'chaim alenu ve'al Yisrael. Imru.
Amen.
Amen. Oseh shalom b'Rabah. Huya aseh shalom. Alenu ve'al Yisrael. Imru. Amen.
Amen.
May the source
Okay.
of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved. As together we say.
Amen. And I'll close with a traditional song, Adon Olam, to the traditional melody that, although some people think it was given at Sinai along with the Seret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, is actually, I am told, a German drinking song. So unless you hold melodies in too much piety. So again, I don't know, mute, unmute, it's up to you. I'm going to sing loud so it won't disturb me. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa B'chefso Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Ve'acharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Hoveh והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני, להמשילו, להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצור חבלי בעת צרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא בידו, הפקיד רוחי בעת אישן בעירה, ואם רוחי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא אירא. And the translation of the last verse, I think is pretty powerful. God is with me and I will not fear. It doesn't say that bad things aren't going to happen. It doesn't say we're not going to have problems, but we don't have to fear because God is with us and our community is with us. And Shabbat Shalom. And I will end screen sharing. And as Rabbi mentioned, I'm not rushing off. So if people have other comments, questions, as I always say, alternative sermons, this is the time. And again, I would like to thank Rabbi Singer, Rabbi Cohn, and I can't.
Rabbi Koch.
Yes, she keeps disappearing in my screen. For joining us and paying me the great honor of allowing me to lead these services. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it and wishing Shabbat Shalom. And please stay on if you would like to continue talking about what Rabbi Lotker spoke about or about something else.
Yeah, she